shock, you get your big old face right right in the camera. So yeah, so thank you all so much. Welcome. And I'm going to turn everything over to Lisa.
All right, thank you, Madeline. And hello, everybody. Welcome and lovely to see you this afternoon. And I thought we would start with we'll start with a meditation, and we'll do a little bit of guiding at the beginning, kind of a spacious grounding meditation is what I call it. So we can kind of ease into our meditation time. So I'll just go ahead and begin. So if you'd like to go ahead and kind of settle into your posture, and we'll kind of launch into our meditation, and I'll start by ringing the bell, and at the end I'll ring the bell again. And so finding a comfortable posture, and hopefully you can allow your feet to be on the floor to connect, and allowing your eyes to close gently or just lowering your gaze. Just taking on that posture of arriving and being here in this moment. And now bringing attention to the breath. And noticing the in and out movement of the breath. And perhaps also, if you're attentive, you might notice the space between the breaths. Each breath, both inhale and exhale, has a stopping point, just a very, very tiny moment before the next inhale or the next exhale. So we can notice, if we're attentive, just this very moment of stopping and beginning again. And now also noticing the space all around the body. And there are places where there's contact, the chair, cushion, but there's a lot of places where it's just space. And we often attend to that which we see and notice, the things in a room, the places of contact, but there's also space. And even space between the thoughts. And even in this sitting, noticing the spaciousness of ground itself. And even the sensations of emotions. Maybe in this attentive practice, finding the sensations, the breath, the emotions, the thoughts have a kind of fluidity that we may not notice in the midst of our busy lives. And now bringing your attention to the areas of contact that your feet are having with the floor. So just feeling the feet. Feeling the sensations of the feet, the movement of those sensations, wherever they are, whatever you notice. And feeling the ground under your feet. Even noticing where your shoes and socks are touching your feet. And now moving to the thighs, where you're sitting, and noticing where they have contact with the chair or the cushion, depending on how you're sitting. And just allowing the ground and the chair to hold and support your body without needing to do anything. And now moving attention to your back. Where does your back touch the back of the chair, feeling the contact? Or if you're on a cushion, you'll notice the space. But in whatever way you're sitting, can you feel the difference between where there is contact and where there's space? And so our consciousness can hold both. And now moving attention to your hands. And feeling into the sensations of your hands. And noticing the position of your hands and what they're touching, what they're making contact with. And sometimes the hands can be a place where we can find a certain degree of ease, pleasantness in our practice. Just feeling the connection and the contact. And now opening your awareness to feel your entire body sitting here in this moment on the chair or the cushion. And noticing the spaciousness that is not only around the body, but actually is through the body. And we can see this spaciousness as not only the actual space in the room, but the space of awareness itself. Something that's always here. even if we don't always notice it. So now bringing attention to the breath. And if you'd like, taking the next couple of breaths a little deeper so you can really feel the breath in the body. And see if you can find a place where the sensations of the breath are the most pleasant or the most easeful. And if that's challenging, you can always open your lens of attention to include more of the body so that you can feel the movement of the breath throughout the body. And we could even allow the breath to bathe the body. And if you're able now to just let the breath breathe itself. Whether it's short or long, deep or shallow, it's all just fine the way it is. And of course, the mind will wander at times, and each time we notice that, we're back in our awareness. We're back in this moment, and we can gently return to the breath and the body and the experience of being present and sharing this practice together. And just letting ourselves, to the best of our ability, just relaxing into this moment. And including awareness of the heart itself. And perhaps feeling in this presence together a connection with all of life. Hello again, and hello to those who have arrived since we started. So I'm going to talk, my Dharma talk today will be a bit about working with not knowing and groundlessness and really finding skillful means to meet and practice with it. And I wanted to start with a quote and a poem, first from Ram Dass. Whether this is the first day of the apocalypse or the first day of the golden age, our work remains the same: to love each other and ease as much suffering as possible. And I want to share this from Wendell Berry. It may be when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work, and that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey. And so for a lot of people, this is a time of uncertainty and not knowing. And, we humans naturally seek ground and certainty. And a lot of that is relative to survival issues, needing shelter, food, our basic needs covered. So it's instinctual to seek that certainty. But as the Buddha taught, the law of impermanence sometimes upends certainty. It's part of the Buddha's First Noble Truth of suffering. And right now, things feel like they're shifting quite a bit. And for many, it's hard to navigate. And there may be a gap between what we wanted and planned or expected and the actual reality. And I saw this a lot during COVID too. And for some people, there's a feeling of groundlessness or uncertainty. And so often that happens, just speaking from my own experience, when I'm in the realm of the unknown and something happening in my life where there's perhaps a feeling of not knowing and not knowing how to deal with something or not knowing what to do next, it can be really uncomfortable. And when I'm not meeting it consciously, I tend to contract and things start getting tight and awareness seems more distant. But if I can notice it and I can bring a kind of awareness to it, I find that the space will open up. It's not that I have to do something initially, but allowing the awareness to touch into that tightness or that contracting around not knowing and uncertainty. And then there's a space that starts to open. And sometimes we may feel grief or disappointment, need to acknowledge our feelings or fear. But when we see our mind and we can meet it with a certain level of awareness and compassion, that space opens up for us to be with the way things are. The suchness, in Zen, the word suchness, the truth of how things are in this moment. And we can even see the elements we have no control over, and maybe then what we also do have control over. And perhaps then we can find some beneficial actions as well and begin to relax the nervous system. And I just think, this is something that we have to engage again and again, this gap between how things are and how we need them to be or want them to be. And that's where the groundlessness is. And it can be a place of freedom, and sometimes it can be a place of great fear. And when there is a lot of fear, I think of fear as like an electrical system where when the current exceeds capacity, it blows. And so when our own capacity is exceeded, we either shut down or blow up. And part of our practice then is to cultivate awareness of our limit and to see where the fear and discomfort maybe has exceeded our capacity to be present. And I don't know that we always get that instruction in our practice, but sometimes we really need to titrate, and move in and out of what we're dealing with and not necessarily bare knuckle it, but really to bring that kind of awareness to what's arising, especially in the midst of uncertainty. And, I find in the midst of uncertainty, it really helps to first focus on what's true in the moment, in this moment, in this moment. Are you relatively safe? Do you have your basic needs met? Can you bring your awareness to your body and breath or other present moment object of attention like sound? It's these simple practices that really can help ground us. And a lot of times when we do that too, we might find a deep vulnerability. We have, I think the important thing is allowing the parts of our humanity in this life that can't be solved or figured out or concluded just in this moment, and to find some space for that. And then we work with that through our practice to expand our container. I think of the container as sort of how much of our awareness can expand to hold our experiences. And then we can tune in again to compassion or a wise response. And an example that I can give you where my practice was enormously helpful was, some years back when my husband and I had just recently been married, my husband was diagnosed with testicular cancer. And there was a big gap of time between when they discovered it and when they would find out whether it had spread, because the only way they can find out is to do surgery. And so, scheduling the surgery meant there was a good bit of time, a big gap. And I was kind of going crazy in the not knowing, in the fear. And, so you just don't know in those moments how things are going to be. And I found that, I was so restless and so kind of wound up that, one, I wasn't helping myself, and I certainly wasn't helping him either. And I started to remember, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I thought, I'm going to commit to spending every moment possible totally present, nowhere else. I knew that I couldn't do anything else. Now, I kept my actions the proper actions. It's not that I shut down, but that I brought my full attention into each moment of life that was unfolding in front of me and with him. And it began to allow my nervous system to unwind and start to relax again. And I was able to navigate that time of great uncertainty and unknowing and fear with a lot more space, and to get through to that point of where the surgery was. And so it really saved me from being like just a nervous wreck the whole time with myself or with my husband. And so I wasn't making fear the enemy, but I didn't let that kind of river of the mind go so far as to turn me into just a totally disconnected person who just couldn't handle it. And I do think for a lot of people right now, that can really be difficult. Looking at the news too much, dealing with the not knowing can really destabilize. And if we can really, in a compassionate way, bring ourselves into what we know right now, and then what can I do right now? How can I meet this moment? And then also, how can I act in a way that's skillful? And, some of you know Jack Kornfield, and he often uses this story from Thich Nhat Hanh about the refugee boat, where when everybody is on the boat and everybody's in a state of overwhelming fear, he said, if just one person could be calm and could hold that space, then others would have hope that they too could do so. And it's like just allowing and seeing that there is a way. And so holding that and allowing, I think our practice can really show us how to do this, and show us to be that person on the boat that knows how to hold presence and hold that ultimately for other people if possible. And, so I think sometimes not knowing can be really hard to sit with, or it seems that way because there's no ground, that sense of groundlessness. And we can't always hold it all at once. And sometimes we need to stick with what we know in this moment. And, one of the teachings in Buddhism about meeting the moment and meeting our experience is, one, first we want to meet it with wisdom if we can. Meeting an experience, meeting the moment with wisdom is to meet it and to see the way it truly is without our own projections, our own fear, our own mental activities. But if we can't meet it with wisdom, the instruction then is to meet it with compassion and kindness. And so then we meet our fear, our discomfort, our not knowing with kindness. And sometimes that meeting with kindness can kind of open us up to presence, where then wisdom arises. But there are times when the circuits are so overloaded that we can't meet our experience, even with compassion. And and so when the circuits are that overloaded, sometimes we really do need to distract ourselves. So distraction and diversion can be skillful means when we need to change the channel for a while. And so we don't have to always just stay present with overwhelming experiences, but we can actually sometimes distract and come back. And slowly the circuits begin to be a little not overloaded, and we can meet our experience more fully with wisdom or compassion. And I remembered years ago, I was dealing with a situation in my life where I had a great sense of uncertainty in my life. I had left my job and I had a relationship that was ending, and everything felt like my life was falling apart completely. And I didn't know what my next livelihood was going to be. I was very lonely. I didn't have really anybody in my life aside from this one relationship. And I was talking to my therapist about this. And the thing he said to me is, he said, you need to learn to walk where there is no ground. And when I heard that, it was really, for a moment, it was like, wait, how can you walk where there is no ground? I couldn't quite get that image in my mind, but then I started looking and seeing and creating this image of walking where there is no ground. And it gave me a sense of possibility. It gave me a sense that maybe I could move in the groundlessness, that I didn't have to be paralyzed, or I didn't have to be completely overwhelmed. And it began to help me to actually move forward in my life. And there was another situation where some of you might know David Loy. He's a teacher in the Zen tradition, and he's got the Rocky Mountain Eco Dharma Center. And he had come to the organization that I lead, he'd come to be a guest teacher for one Dharma. And we were having dinner, and I was telling him how I was going to take a flight with somebody in our Sangha who had a little single engine Cessna, and he was going to fly us from Nashville to Asheville and back. And David said, oh, my wife would never, my wife won't fly in a single engine plane. And I somehow I'd never thought about single engine, and it got me a little scared for a minute. And then he said, there's an old famous quote, some of you might have heard of it. The good news is you're falling from a plane with no parachute. The bad news is you're falling from a plane with no parachute. The good news is that there is no ground. And so that groundlessness is actually safety when you realize you're not going to hit anything. And it actually made me feel a little bit better. That helped me to kind of get a little sense of orientation around that. And so, one of the things that happens in practice is that working with what we know is also helpful in our practice to start when we have these feelings of groundlessness and uncertainty, starting with what we know in our practice, the simple practices, some of which we did in the guided meditation, starting with grounding in your body. And one of the things that the Buddha taught was that the body is the least changing of all the four foundations. And the four foundations of mindfulness being breath and body, feeling tones, mind, and then dharmas, which is all the activity of this human life. And so starting with the body, because of the four foundations, it's the least changing. It's the easiest to actually access, especially in times of upheaval or when the mind is uncertain. Grounding in the body, mindfulness of breath, mindfulness of this moment is where we can begin to connect a little bit more. Of course, our body changes, but of all of these, it's the most accessible. And we can feel the grounding, and we can expand outward and see the connection, inner and outer. And so starting with what we know, and if the body is difficult for you to practice with, other aspects of what's present, the sound, can be a really great practice to work with. But ways that we can come to a point of connecting with the body and then learning. And once we're able to do that, it becomes a little easier to inhabit the terrain of not knowing, Because the truth is, the reality is in this life that probably 90% of this life is mystery. There are those things that we know and that we do have some control over, but the vastness of this life is so full of mystery. And making room for that mystery is, of course, part of this practice. And there's so much that we don't know, but if we make room for, then it begins to open. And when things get difficult, we can really begin to investigate. And we can investigate in the practice itself, maybe letting go of conclusions about how things are, what we think we know. And it can be really helpful to sometimes let it go and just allow life to be what it is. And I remember one time when I was practicing in the Zen tradition, we had this little small place that we met for our practice. And one time we were doing walking meditation, and there was somebody who was a really big part of our Sangha who hadn't been there that morning. But I noticed as we were doing walking meditation, she arrived late, and I noticed her reflection in the glass. She was wearing something red, and I just saw her reflection, and there was something so indelible for me when I saw that. And it was the last time I ever saw her. She died in a car accident a week later. And of course, my heart was so broken. And the certainty is shattered in moments like that, right? When these unexpected things happen. And so the next week after she died, we were sitting in the meditation hall. And I was sitting by the door, and it was warm weather, and the door was open, and there was just a screen door, and this little bird was sitting at the door, and it was trying so hard to get in. And it's like I felt her in that moment. And I felt her presence in that bird. And of course, I didn't know what that was about ultimately. I couldn't really say, that bird was some embodiment of her in that moment, wanting to be with us. But I could just open my heart to the mystery of that moment, and the tenderness and the love, and even the grief, and just let it be what it was. And it was almost as if the bird was the messenger, and just opening my heart to that messenger was enough to let me just be in the moment and allow it to be what it was, and to not have any certainty about it. But there was something so touching, and after all these years, I still remember that, because it was just such a touching moment. And so, with our practice, sometimes it is the grounding, and touching into what's true in this moment, and opening the space of awareness that can expand outward. And then we can see that connection. We can feel the connection of inner and outer, so that we are truly connected, not only with our own experience, but with that of this great global community that we have. And I know sometimes maybe we don't feel so connected to the great global community, and yet it's always here. And I think that's the power of our practice and our awareness. And I really do think that in times of not knowing, times of fear or groundlessness, that these connections and this simple practice of presence can really bring us so much stability, and really give us what we need, so that we can continue forward in this life. No matter what's happening, we can still continue, and hopefully we can, at least some of the time, be that person on the boat that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about. So I'm going to close my talk here, but I would be most happy to open it to any comments or reflections or questions, anything. So I'll just open it up, and Melanie, I guess you could kind of spotlight or see who's there. If somebody would like to speak, just put the hand up or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you're welcome to just unmute yourself, anyone who would like to, or if you want to send me something in the chat. And while you're all kind of thinking about what you want to say, I can not imagine a more apropos quote that you shared with us, the Ram Dass quote. Whether this is the first day of the apocalypse or the golden age, that is so beautiful. Maybe while you're visiting, I'll put that in the chat for folks. That is just so great. Yeah. So anyone to have a share, you're welcome to. Sometimes we're kind of thinking about how everything's landing. Such a beautiful share with us, Lisa. Thank you. One person said, please share the quote. I have it right here. I'm going to pull it up.
Nice. I was actually going to ask if I could share another Thich quote that I found this morning.
Oh, yes.
It says, to be beautiful means to be yourself. You don't need to be accepted by others. You need to accept yourself.
Beautiful.
Very
Thank
good.
you. It's so beautiful. Mm.
I want to say thank you, Brittany, for sharing that. And also thank you, Lisa, for bringing us together. And for these teachings, I work in mental health and do a lot of, it's just a consistent theme, but I also experience it myself. The grappling with uncertainty, personal and on a greater, global and national level. So I want to say thank you for the acknowledgement about that sometimes when it's unbearable, like a temporary distraction can be helpful, not as a way to live life. And sometimes I like to think of it as, again, a different type of mindfulness. So it's like we're shifting, we can distract and still be mindful. And so the distraction can be the wisdom, as long as it's not destructive or too destructive. But there's so much that you've shared here that I want to hold on to. And this notion of what happens when we open our hearts to the mystery of the moment. And of course, I'm just grateful for the Sangha here today. It really helps the week.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I think about distraction as, I think the instructions used to, I've been doing this for a long time, and the instructions used to be very rigid. It was like, always be present no matter what, sit through everything. And there was a phrase that someone coined that I thought really spoke to when we need to give ourselves some space. And it's using bare awareness to bear down on the unbearable. And that's when we need to use our skillful means to say, no, sometimes I need to consciously pull myself back and distract for a while and then come back. So it is, you're right, distraction can really be skillful means. Sometimes we need a break and we need to create space for ourselves and recognize that too is a wise response when we just can't do it all. We can't do it all the time, for sure. Yeah.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Hi, thanks so much for holding the space, Lisa. And just always so beautiful to be here. One thing that I think about sometimes is like, I feel lucky enough and grateful to have a practice. And I tell people sometimes more in depth, sometimes just more in passing, like, hey, what'd you do this weekend comes up. Went to a meditation group, did this, did that. And I'm just throwing it in like it's because it's part of my routine. So I'm wondering if there are any skillful ways to talk to people who are less familiar with these teachings and less familiar with meditation and do that without sounding preachy or sounding like, oh, well, I've got it all figured out because I meditate. Because this comes up a lot, and I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Thank you.
You're welcome. So you're saying that it comes up where they ask what you're doing, they're asking you about it, and you're looking
Yeah.
for how to share. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think one way is to do it in a humble but way to say this is what I do that's helping me, so that you're not preachy, but you're not bragging like I've got it all worked out, but more, this is what is meaningful to me right now. This is, so that you're responding in a way that is oriented toward your experience and what's valuable to you in your practice, and recognizing that, other person might take it or leave it, but done in a way so if they're curious, then there's a little bit of an opening there, and that it can be done. And this just really is, just some very simple ways to share what is helpful to you in terms of how your practice is helping you. And then if they're interested, they might ask more. But, I think that can be done skillfully, without it being boastful or without proselytizing, but just here's what's helpful to me, and they might then get a little more interested, perhaps,
Thank you.
I wanted to share, Lisa. I've never heard such a great explanation of that groundlessness. And I wrote down what you said, learning to walk where there is no ground, that it's really like kind of visualizing this sense of possibility. And I've never heard it really phrased exactly like that. And I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate that take on that. Was a really great, a great teaching.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah, it sure helped me when I was in a total space of groundless. It's just even the visual image was helpful to me. It's like it's like it opened the possibility. Like all the time I thought, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. Maybe I can,
Yeah, learn to walk where there's no ground. I wrote down what you said. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So anybody else? We could do a short, if nobody has anything else, we'd just do a short kind of compassion, dedication of merit, just a few minute practice where we're just moving into the compassion space. So, okay, let's do that for a few minutes. So just,
I could ask one thing.
oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just still thinking about going back to what we were saying around distraction. And I think the word you used was oscillate, like in between like the presence and the distraction and going, or I'm not sure exactly the word, but that's the word that I'm substituting in for it. Um, and I'm curious for myself, and I'm sure many other folks can relate. I can sometimes become distracted, and I feel that the distraction is almost too distracting, and I do need to come back to presence, but I
Yes.
really struggle to do that. So I'm curious, like in those moments, either when the person can identify that the distraction is too distracting, or they're so absorbed in the distraction that they can't even step out of it and have the awareness that what they are distracting themselves with is too distracting. I think there's like multiple experiences there, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And sometimes the distraction, we do almost get frozen in it, and for a while there can be almost a freeze. And that happens to me sometimes. I notice that I'm just, it's like, but it's that noticing moment, when you oh wow, this, and it can really start to feel uncomfortable when that distraction becomes almost it becomes really unpleasant, and it becomes suffering, so then it's like, is suffering present? Is the mind becoming, and there's just like a moment, and that's the thing that happens for me, is like there's just this moment, oh, this is becoming unpleasant. It's almost like then the distraction can become as overwhelming as the overwhelm we were getting away from. So in that moment, it's like, oh wait, for me, what happens is it's just a moment of noticing and waking up, and then saying, okay, now what's happening in my body in this moment, in the midst of this? How am I, where's the contraction? And can I touch on that? And then can I allow some awareness to begin to come in to my experience? And when that awareness comes in there, then there's more space. And then for me, it's amazing when this happens, because just within minutes, I start to relax and I feel better, because I trust that the space of awareness is always present. And if I'm open to it, it will be here and support me. And it can shift me back into a place of greater ease. It doesn't necessarily solve everything, but it does create a kind of ease that I'm not resisting my experience. And so often that is where the suffering comes in, is in that resisting of experience. And so for me, that opens it back up. So yes, you're right. The continuum can go from kind of a skillful, aware, distracting to move away from overwhelm, to being in the distraction of overwhelm. So you're right, we have to kind of navigate, these spaces with as much intention and awareness as we can. But I just find that touching in on that space of awareness just changes everything, because it's like the alchemy of awareness is a new ingredient that gets introduced, and it simply changes the landscape of our experience. And so that's the skill of working with practice. And that's the beauty of our practice, I think, is developing that skillfulness. So thank you. That's a great question.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. That was, so much wisdom in that.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today.